Hey guys, welcome to the channel. My name is Joseph Frazier, and today we're going to go over JavaScript functions. By the end of today, hopefully you can understand what a function is, the key things you need to know about a function, and how to implement one in your JavaScript programming to make you a more efficient developer. Let's get started.
Here we are in our intro to functions. So we're going to basically allow you to go through writing JavaScript functions, understanding what is involved in a function in JavaScript. And then on top of that, you'll be able to kind of like write the functions and understand the different technical aspects that are involved in writing a function. So a function in JavaScript is made up of initially three things. Those three things are going to be the keyword function and then the name of that function. The next one we're going to have is also going to be what is called the parameters of a function. You typically see this with that open and close. These are called parentheses. And then the last part of this one that we're going to have is the body of the function. Okay, this is the part where the code goes inside of here and it runs the different things inside of this function body. So it's basically made up of three things, and I'm going to show you a few ways how to do this. Ultimately, this is going to allow you to be really familiar with writing functions and understanding like the different aspects that go into a function. When I introduce maybe a little bit more advanced concepts in a future video regarding how to make functions like declaring them as variables or spreading arguments inside of an array, or doing different things inside of a function that might be a little more advanced, you'll understand at least these foundations so that you can build upon here. So a function is basically like a list of steps. It's a list of things that we might want our computer to do that we might find ourselves wanting to do multiple times over. So we write functions so that we don't have to rewrite code. That's the simple premise for writing functions, and it's a good way of thinking about it. So what is a function? Okay. Function is a list of steps that you want your computer to execute. And I'll talk about this kind of more in a way that you can maybe relate to it a little bit more in real life. So like, think about this. If I'm working at a restaurant and I'm giving a set of steps, okay? So when an order comes in, I'm going to take that order, going to place it on this window. Once I take it and place it on this window, I'm going to go through the different steps in order to make that recipe that the customer ordered, okay? You could say that I'm basically executing a make a recipe function. Now, it depends, right? Because it's like, make a recipe isn't always going to make the same recipe. The order that I'm given might be a recipe for a hamburger. The order that I'm given might be a recipe for a salad. It just depends on what we are going to do with it. But the function itself of making the recipe, gathering the ingredients, cooking it, tossing it, and then serving it back up, that all essentially can remain the same. And that's how you want to kind of think about functions. So to start off in JavaScript, the simpler way to start it off would be to write a function using the keyword function in JavaScript. Okay, this is a keyword. It's built into JavaScript. This is how you define a function. So if you want to make a function, this is how you define it. So like, let's go ahead and say add two numbers. We're going to call a function called add two numbers. So we had to define a function one by writing the word function and then writing the name of the function. This is like defining what we're going to call it when we want to use it. The next step is to add the parameters if we're going to use any, and that we do with open and close parentheses. Okay. Parameters are basically things that you're going to pass into this function that you're only going to use here in this function. You're not going to use these outside of this function. Just like, for example, if I said, make a recipe, here is the list of ingredients to make this recipe, right? You give me some meat, you give me some vegetables, and you maybe give me some oil, right? I'm going to take those things and only use them within making the recipe right there. I'm not going to use those ingredients outside of making that recipe. And you can apply this to a variety of different things for this function, right? When I say add two numbers, I say like, I'm going to pass in maybe two numbers here to use inside of this function. And you can actually name these whatever you want. I always say go for clarity over just like generic things like A, B. It doesn't really matter what you call them, but it does matter to the developer who is going to be reading your code, or possibly someone else who's going to be reading code. It really does help. So go for clarity over anything. So we're going to pass in a number 1 and a number 2. This is the first argument of the parameter, and this is the second argument of the parameters right here. Next thing we want to do is the function body. Okay, and inside of the function body, here we write all of our code in JavaScript. Now, you can write any JavaScript inside of this function body, and it will live here inside of this body. It's not going to get exposed to other code outside of these boundaries. You can think of it like it's its own self-contained world, but it's only going to live inside here. So for example, I can say, if I want to add 2 numbers, we can make a variable here. Let's just say we're going to make a constant called the sum, which is going to equal number 1 plus number 2. Okay. So by making this variable sum, which is going to contain 1 and 2 added together, this is going to add these numbers together and store it in this variable. We can use this variable anywhere inside of our function as long as we refer to the name. And the last part here that you want to think about is that functions by default in JavaScript, they return undefined. What does that mean? Okay. So that means if you use this function and you don't have a word return in it, what it says it will return is basically undefined. JavaScript returns undefined, which is a data type that we'll learn about in a future video. Those data types in JavaScript are specific to JavaScript, and we are going to go ahead and say, like, if you don't use the keyword return, this function returns undefined. Why would we want our function to return something? Okay, that's a great question. And that is really going to be based off of what you want your function to do. So it all is going to go in how you use this function, but typically you want to have some return value so that your function, once it's finished doing something, much like when it's finished taking your order, you want to return the finished product to the customer or to the server who's going to take in that order. So I'm going to say return using the keyword return here in JavaScript. I'm going to use return, and then I'm going to say I'm going to return the sum. So I'm going to return these 2 numbers that we add up together. Okay. Now, we've gone through the steps of defining our first function. You use the keyword function. You give the name of the function, whatever name you want to call it. I would always go for clarity over something very general or very generic. We pass in some parameters here. We're going to pass in 2 values. I called them num1, num2. You can call them whatever you want as long as you refer to them by the same names that you define up here. Next, we have the open close curly braces. This defines our body inside here. This is our function body. Inside of our function body, we can go ahead and do whatever JavaScript code we want. We're going to add these 2 numbers, store them in a sum variable, and return that. Now, this is the process of defining a function, okay? Defining a function. This just says, hey, computer, store somewhere in your memory this logic right here. And I'm going to refer to that logic when I call this name. Okay, what do I mean by calling this name? So when I call this name, this is defining a function. It actually won't execute. It won't run. It won't take the order. It won't start making the recipe unless you tell it to. So that's where you go and you call a function. Okay, and calling a function, running a function, invoking a function, these are all like similar words that are used to mean the same thing. Run your function, make it do the code that is inside of it. We do that by calling the name of the function, which is add 2 numbers, and then we always have an open close parentheses. Okay, open close parentheses calls the function, runs the function, invokes the function, so that it does these lines of code. Now you might be looking at this function line right here on line 15 and be like, oh wait, aren't we supposed to give it 2 numbers to add up? You're right, we have to pass it 2 numbers in order for it to run. Because right now, if I run this function and I don't give it 2 numbers, it's gonna return undefined as well, because there's no numbers that are there adding up together. So what I wanna do is I wanna go ahead and pass a number, I'll say 10. That's going to go into the first parameter that we have right there. And then when I separate it with another comma and then I put a number 20, that's going to go inside of the second parameter that we defined, okay? So now what I can do is I can write this console log. Console log is also a function. And what it does is it'll print in my terminal what this function returns, or if it returns anything, it'll print it. So let me show you here. I'm going to pull up my terminal really quick. Once I have my terminal up, we can go ahead and run this. We are going to run this using node. Okay, so I'm going to write the word node, and then I'm going to write the name of my file, which is function.js. And when I hit enter here, okay, we see that nothing got printed out because we haven't saved our code yet. So let me go ahead and save my code really quick. Always gotta love the little errors that you forget about. Run this one, and now we see that adding two numbers prints out 30. Because where did we get 30 from? 10 was passed to the first number, 20 was passed to the second number. We added them up here and put them inside of this word sum, and that is what we return. Now let me show you what happens if we don't return sum. So if I don't return this, what I told you is JavaScript returns undefined by default. So I'll save this here really quick, run my code one more time, and you see the word undefined. Does that mean it didn't do this logic? Does that mean it did not do line 9? It didn't add them together? No, it actually did. It did do this logic because we called the function here on line 14. However, all we did was add them and store them. We didn't use this function for anything. So that is why you kind of always want to return something if you want your function to do or be more useful. We can actually call a function like that in console log, or what I can also do is I can make a variable here. Let's just call high score. And I'm going to have add two numbers my function, open close parentheses, and I'm going to pass it some big numbers. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to console log this variable. High score. Okay, now let's run this one more time. We see the first one where I ran it right here. The console log is 30. We see the second one, which takes in the number 200 and 300. It takes that, adds them together, and sends it back to my function. My function takes that value and returns it and puts it in high score. High score now contains 500. Now I can use that variable anywhere else I want in my code. Okay, so now you're seeing that basically whatever lines of logic you want to do inside of your function, it's really up to you, right? This is adding two numbers. If we wanted to write a function that says add three numbers, what would you have to change? I would say go ahead, pause the video right now, see what you would have to change here in order to add three numbers, okay? We're gonna give you three numbers so that you can go ahead and add them up. If you pause the video and tried to change your code, what would you need to change? You would just basically have to add one more parameter. We would have to change this line to take in the third number, and then that would be good. However, we also need to change the name of our function. And changing the name of the function, that is all for clarity's sake, because this will still work. This will still add three numbers, but you always want to go for clarity. So let's say add three numbers. And now when I go and call these functions down here, we want to pass in, let's say 20 to both of them. Now run the function one more time. And now you see that it adds three numbers. But if you're starting to look at this function, you might be like, well, what if I want to add 4 numbers? What if I want to add 15 numbers? What if I want to add 30 numbers, right? This is where you can start to look at the code and you can make some improvements. Instead of calling it add 3 numbers, let's actually call this one sum. Okay, I'm going to sum these two numbers. And then I'm going to change this just to keep us like safe without having some weird confusing words. I'm going to make this the total sum. So now if I want to use my sum function, I can pass it these numbers and and then it will go ahead and run. Now, again, that is for clarity's sake. You're always trying to go for clarity as you're starting off your journey as a new software developer. You want to start writing functions that are clear, easy to understand, easy for you to understand, and easy for other people to read and see what you're trying to do here. So let's go ahead and go down here. I'm going to take off this console log right there, and then take off this console log right here. All of this code will be pushed up to my GitHub, which is going to be linked in the video description down below. So if you want to view this code, feel free to do that one. We're going to make another function, okay? So I'm going to create a function called convert, or let's just say uppercase name. Okay, so we're going to basically send in a name, and this name will be uppercased when we return it. So it'll go like all caps. Okay, so if I pass in Joseph or Joe, it'll give all caps Joe or all caps Joseph as its return value. Okay, so I'm going to define the function using the keyword function, the name of the function, which we're going to call uppercase. Make sure to fix that error right there. Uppercase name. And then I'm going to pass it a name variable. Okay, so now this is the function name, the parameters right here. The parameter of name is what it's going to be receiving. And then we have the body of the function as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually return in one line name, and then there's this built-in function. This is a function that's built in, or method built into JavaScript called .toUpperCase. And what it does is it takes in a string or a word inside of quotation marks. It takes in a string and it uppercases it. So if I give it a name, make that name all caps. So if I pass in a name like Joe, it should return Joe like that. Okay, so if our function works, how would you call this function? How do you run this function, call this function, invoke this function? Pause the video right here and see what you would do. Okay, after you've paused the video and you've given it a try, what you should have done would have been console.log, just to go ahead and print everything out, uppercase name. And once we print that one out, we'll go ahead and put an uppercase name right here, and I'll pass it the name Joe. Okay. So once I pass it the name Joe, that will go ahead and save our code. Let's run it one more time. Okay. And we see the capitalized word Joe. Okay, so now we see that our function is working and our function is doing what we wanted it to do. Now, here's the thing. You could actually not pass in, when you give a variable or a parameter like this, when you pass it in here and you pass in an argument down to that parameter, what if someone passed 12? What would that do? Save and pause the video right here and run the code and see what it shows. If you pause the video and ran this code, you'll see that when we run it, we'll get an error. Name.toUpperCase is not a function. What does that mean? Well, we know this is a function, but like I said a little bit ago, this function only works if we provide it a string or something in quotation marks. And what I'm providing it here is a number or an integer in JavaScript. So that actually breaks this function. You can't run this function on that data type. So what we could do is, in the event like this, we could check to make sure that the person gives us a number. We want to check to make sure that they provide us the right number. And that we could use conditionals for, or like an if statement. That is what you can watch if you look at my video that I'll go ahead and release for conditionals, and we'll go into a little bit more detail so that you can safeguard your functions and they do a little bit more of checking before they just do the thing that you want it to do. So in other words, what I can do is I can check to make sure that I get only a string, and if I get a string, I'll uppercase it. If I don't get a string, maybe I'll send an error back and say, hey, please give me a string, something like that. So now you've seen that you can go ahead and pass any parameter or any data type, into these parameters. But for the sake of our example, we'll go ahead and pass in Samantha. And now when we run our code, we see Samantha is all caps. And this is just a simple explanation, okay? I want to give you the simplest explanation on how you define a function, what is required inside of a function, what is required inside of a parameter. You don't always have to pass parameters here. You can have as many as you want. You can call them anything you want, but it's always good to keep it clear. Then inside of here, we can do a lot of different logic inside of the function body, and that logic will stay inside of this function. In our next video, when we go over a little bit more detailed functions, we'll go into functions a little bit more detailed and a little bit more advanced. We'll cover different things that you can do inside of your function, giving parameters default values or giving them default data types. We can also check inside of our functions, or hey, maybe we want to pass multiple. We don't know how many parameters we're going to pass. What do we do when we have unlimited number of parameters? We can go into that one a little bit more. But now with this knowledge, you should know the three things that really make up a function in JavaScript: a function name, a parameters and parentheses, and then the function body. I hope you use this tool to kind of further build yourself up. If you need any more explanations or have any comments that you would like to make, or if you're a more seasoned developer and you want to go ahead and add a little bit more information that I maybe didn't cover in this video, feel free to comment down below, and I'll take any feedback that you guys give, hopefully build it out into something that can be better used by all of you, and make another video in regards to that.
And there you have it. That's functions in JavaScript. It's not too complicated, but it can definitely be a little bit more complex if you don't know the specifics about it. Hopefully now you know how to implement functions in your JavaScript programming and you're becoming a more efficient developer. If you like content like this, feel free to go ahead and hit subscribe, leave a comment down below, and like this video. If you have any questions or any content you would like to see in the future, feel free to let me know. Until next time, catch you later.